What is the most messed up thing your parents have done to you? While growing up, my parents would argue every so often, and it would escalate to screaming matches, and it pretty much sucked. This went on until I was 4 or so. The last time it happened, my father struck my mother, and she decided it was time for us to leave. We lived out in the country where neighbors weren't around for miles. The closest neighbor we had was about 7 miles away. My mother grabbed my baby brother and headed out the door. I was already outside, avoiding them and their screaming. She told me to follow her, so I did. As we were leaving the property, my father yells out for my mother to come back, which she refuses to do so. "Come back, or I'll dispense a bullet in Alta Count 9229. She turned and refused again, and I turned around in disbelief. My father threatened to shoot me if she didn't come back. I just stood there, not knowing what to do. He called out to her name, "Come back now." I stood there as my mother walked back to grab my hand. As she reached for it, my father pulled the trigger. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital 2.5 weeks later. My father actually did it. And that is the worst thing either of my parents have done to me. My dad came out when I was 15. My mother, a religious zealot, pretty much manipulated my view of him, declaring that he was destroying not only their marriage, but also our family, and dragged me to Love Won Out conferences, which were, for all intents and purposes, brainwashing, bigoted, gay-bashing parties. She forced me into Christian counseling and cried to me daily about how horrible he was. I found myself distancing myself from my father, whom I had considered my best friend for most of my life. Eventually, about 3 months later, I realized that she was one of the most hateful and hurtful human beings on earth and came back to my dad asking for forgiveness. He's sitting next to me while we are vacationing in Hawaii right now, and my mother and I have a weird distant relationship now. My stepdad, or one of my mom's pimps, depending on how you look at it, stole my high school girlfriend, got her addicted to illegal substances, and turned her into a hooker. He even told me he was going to do it as soon as he met her. Okay, I think that might be the worst one. That is the worst one, and I hope that guy's in prison, or dead, preferably from horrible, unnatural causes. I married a woman for her papers. Her parents were illegal immigrants. She was born in Mexico 3 months before they made their exodus. When she was 25 years old, she found out that the social security number that her mom was using was actually hers. She was born in Ontario, Canada, not Mexico. As a result of being raised thinking she was an illegal, she dropped out of high school believing she wouldn't be able to graduate high school without a social security number. Damn, that mom kinda screwed her kid over. My parents guilted me into loaning them $8,000, over half my paycheck, for a year when I was 17. It is now 4 years later, and I'm pretty sure they have no intention of paying me back. I think my dad forgot it ever happened. My mom and dad separated when I was 8. When I turned 15, he was diagnosed with colon cancer and died a year later. On his deathbed, she did everything she could to talk him into marrying her again, all while he was extremely medicated. She had him brought to Out Home for hospice so he could be with his children. He never agreed to marry her again, regardless of her constant attempts, but he did make the mistake of giving her power of attorney. He passed away, and she took all of his estate for herself and conned my sisters and I into signing away parts of our inheritance while we were still young and dumb. All 3 of us. 14 years later, still have financial trouble when we could have had our lives and education taken care of by our hard-working father. We no longer acknowledge her as anything but our birth giver now that we're all grown up and know what she did to our family. His death day is the 21st of July. Rest in peace, Dad. I understand wanting a lot of money for yourself. I get it. But when you're so greedy that you're like, "No, the money's only mine. Screw my children. They can go to hell for all I care." It's just, what the hell? You are too greedy. Mine used my social security and other personal information to drain $76,000 from my savings account, which I had built up over the course of saving every penny, working in a crappy used bookstore for 5 years while selling Magic the Gathering cards on the side in high school.
"Hey, Brandine, we gotta dip into the boys' Magic the Gathering card money."
That is how that conversation went down. You can't convince me otherwise. Sorry your parents stole all your money. My dad has been saving up for me to go to college since I was really young. When the time finally came, I applied to my top choice of college, and I got in. I even got a financial aid package with the school covering $47,000 of the $56,000 bill. The first payment is due in less than a month, and my dad gets the idea to tell me he can't afford for me to go anymore. It turns out he took all the money he saved for me and spent it to fix his house so he could sell it. But that's not the end. He bought my sister a car, one that she relies on to get to work and school. My other sister dropped out of high school a few months before she would have graduated. She also has no desire to drive, but yet she convinced my father to take the car from my sister just so she wouldn't have it. Sounds like a case of sibling resentment that's been going on for a bit too long. My mom's husband got sent to jail. While he was there, I let my mom stay with me as he was the provider in their home. She ran my phone bill up over $2,000 in collect calls. I also helped get her on assistance so she could help with rent as we moved to a bigger place to be able to fit everyone. I first had to pay off a bank account over $200 that was in overdraft for her to be able to get money. When she finally got her assistance check, she put me on the phone with the butthole so he could tell me that she sent the whole thing to him as he just got out of jail and needed money. That jerk-off went to jail for child smut. Then to boot, she took off to go stay with him without a goodbye, and I haven't seen her in 4 years, and she refuses to come back. We were really close before all of this. Let me tell you what my old man did to me before I was old enough to talk. Because my father loved me so very much, he decided that we should share the same name. My mom had the foresight to be wary of this. She figured with the same name, financial mishaps could easily be blamed on the wrong person. My dad assured her that due to our age difference, that could never happen. However, money got tight around the time I turned 1, and my dad didn't want to cut back. So, what did he do? He opened 5 new lines of credit with my social security number and maxed them all out in a matter of months. That might have been okay if he had ever intended to pay them back, but of course he didn't. When I turned 18 and applied for, well, anything, I got a resounding no. I decided to check my credit, and what did I see? Well, you've already heard the story, so yeah, 5 maxed out credit cards. But that's not all. He also assigned medical bills to me, as well as large amounts of other miscellaneous stuff. I've been fighting this crap from the onset of my adult life, and no, I haven't been able to resolve it all yet. Some things would require that I go to court, and call me old-fashioned, but I can't sue my parents. Screw the credit system, and screw irresponsible parents. Clearly, there was a reason why your mother was wary in the beginning. My parents have each dated and married and divorced people that are younger than my brothers and me. The worst thing, however, that I've witnessed my dad do is push my grandma down a flight of stairs. My mom does horrible things all of the time. When I was a child, she once took my brothers and me to a guy's house while my stepdad was at work. They put us in front of the TV with a pizza and had loud SX in the bedroom. They got divorced while I was in college and didn't tell me. They pretended to be together for 4 months until I decided to randomly come home to surprise them. It was rather surprising to see all my dad's stuff gone and pictures of my mom and some other guy up all over the place. When I was 17, I woke up at 3:30 a.m. to see 2 men I had never seen before talking with my parents. I was informed I was being sent to a wilderness program in Utah and that we were going to be leaving in a few minutes. I was forced to get dressed and I was driven to the airport by these 2 thugs. The next morning, I was freezing in the Utah mountains. My mother is terrible with money, so when I went to college and started getting refund checks to help pay for my rent, she started asking me for money. She always promised that she would pay me back in time. She just needed the money at the moment. And now I'm even caring for my underage brother since she could not deal with him anymore. By the end of this semester, I was 3 months late on my own rent payments after having paid for a few of her own rent payments, her taxes, her car troubles, and her having filed affidavits to bring her parents, she's from the Philippines, over here, and even though she got nearly $1,800 a month, she works as a nurse at a big local hospital, she couldn't afford to pay me back even without paying her rent, dropping our cell phone plan, revoking our insurance, and not paying her car payments, on which I'm the lead signer. Yeah, people who are bad with money, especially family members who are fine with not only the erosion of their relationship with you, but also just generally being a pain in the butt in your life, God, they're the worst. My mom decided to leave my dad on Christmas morning when I was 5. Her way of telling him was to just take me and leave. We went to her mother's house where Mike, a guy she used to date before my dad, just happened to be. Truthfully, Dad had been cheating on her too, and he was on illegal substances and was an alcoholic. Anyway, I remember that one night we went to Mike's house and I remember laying on the floor crying about wanting to go home. I remember telling Mom that I smelled the devil's lettuce, and Mike complimented me on how smart I was. Anyway, she divorced Dad, married Mike, and divorced him, and married again by September. As mentioned, Dad was an alcoholic alcoholic and an addict, and that continued for many years. He's admitted to trying every substance except for one, as he was afraid of the side effects. I remember one night when Dad was really depressed, and he told me about how he tried to self-delete himself. He thought about doing it, but then thought about me and decided not to. The only way I could make sense of why he was telling me this was that he wanted to see me hurt, that he gained some sort of pleasure from my pain, and I decided that I would never let him see that he hurt me again. I have very few memories from before my parents split, and I only saw my dad on the weekends after that, and he lived in his parents' basement. Still does, actually. And I spent most of my time there with my grandparents. Growing up, I saw my dad not as a parent, but as someone who I could play video games with. When my grandparents would be planning a vacation, they would let my mom know so she could plan an excuse so as to not send me there without them. There were some rough times and so many broken promises. I remember once when I went downstairs to see Dad and the door was locked and I knocked and didn't get a response and his car was there, so I went back upstairs and told my grandparents. My grandfather went down and ended up breaking the door to get in and found my dad passed out after getting really drunk and taking a lot of sleeping pills. There were so many times I remember when Dad's friends came over and they'd go to the other room to buy and sell and smoke whatever. So many times I know that he put his pleasures above my safety, driving drunk or stoned or taking me along when he was buying illegal substances. Things were bad to the point where we had discussed what to do if I answered the door and it was the police looking for him, or one of his buddies. I was to ask if they had a warrant, and if they didn't, to close the door. I was probably in about 7th grade when I was upstairs getting ready for church when there was a knock at the door. I went to the door and the man identified himself as a detective and asked for my dad. I asked if he had a warrant and he didn't, so I started closing the door. My grandmother heard and came to the door and told him he was downstairs and that she'd go get him. I was thinking she just sold that out, but she knew that the detective was there to talk to him about him getting robbed the night before. I remember growing up wondering if my Christmas presents were stolen, as I'd sometimes get Nintendo games that were in rental boxes instead of retail packaging. I remember things getting stolen from the house and appearing a few weeks later, meaning that he pawned them somewhere. All that said, he claims to be clean now. Got attacked by a dog when I was 5 to 6, torn the left side of my face up pretty badly. My parents sue when they get informed I was the third and most serious attack from the dog. Later, animal abuse was found to have been a factor. A settlement was made, but the money was to be released to me when I turned 18. Fast forward till around my 16th birthday, and I really want a car. My parents tell me with my permission they can access the money early, and I of course agree and get my Honda and am content. Then I turn 18. My parents sit me down and tell me that the best plan is to keep the money in a CD to gain interest. I agreed to this as well. It wasn't until my 20th that I finally started to think of uses for the money, and also that I had never actually seen any statements or actual sum of money on paper from a bank or anything. For the first time, I aggressively asked my parents about it and was told the truth. You probably guessed it, but at 16, when I first gave them permission to use that money, they just used it like a new bank account, drained it dry. I don't hold any grudges. They suck with money and are impulsive. They could never afford to repay either. I'm glad I never really saw how much it was until they told me, because I might have acted like some stereotypical trust fund character. Parents do messed up stuff, but I could have had it a lot worse. Live and learn. Hanging on the edge of tomorrow. Good on this guy for being able to take it in such strides, like he says, live and learn. I would be absolutely livid, that is for sure. But overall, it's good that this person isn't in such dire straits or anything that they're bitter about it, and they're just getting on with their life, and that's cool. All respect to them. My parents got divorced when I was 8. Not a big deal, that kind of stuff happens all the time. Well, neither of them were particularly good parents. I started off living with my dad. He has huge anger issues. Literally anything will set him off and throw him into a violent tantrum. After a few years of this, I moved in with my mom in Texas. My dad and I lived in Tennessee. Well, my mom was a huge illegal substance abuser. She'd frequently use a lot of hard stuff. I could see needle marks. I don't know what she did, and frankly, I don't care. About the time I was 15, her new husband had left her and she just went insane. She would leave for weeks at a time. She would stay in hotels with strange men, and she would spend all her money on illegal substances. We frequently had our utilities turned off since she wouldn't bother paying bills. I wanted to stop living like that, so I wanted to get a job, even a crappy one, somewhere. anywhere. However, I didn't have a driver's license. I had to take driver's ed in the state I was in. I actually asked my mom once if she would stop drinking and doing substances long enough for me to get a license and get a job. She laughed at me and just said no. I had to contact her boss once to see if they knew where she was. He felt bad for me and took me to the grocery store and bought me food, so I had food in the house. Eventually, I got tired of living like that, so I had to move back in with my dad. A few weeks after I left, she was evicted since she stopped making payments on the house, and even spent some time in prison for producing illegal substances in her house and a bunch of other messed up crap. She recently died from heart failure. As terrible of a mother as she was, it was still one of the worst times of my life. My dad didn't change much in the years I lived with my mom. He had a new wife, and he treated her and me like complete crap. He made me live essentially in a closet. If I said something he didn't like, he'd threaten me. One time, he grabbed me by the hair, threw me against the wall, and threatened to almost kill me. I immediately contacted the police. They closed the investigation pretty much immediately. At the age of 17, my dad kicked me out after an argument about, I kid you not, our ISP. The police came and wouldn't even listen to me. I was a straight A student in high school, never had a disciplinary record of any kind, and they just called me a delinquent and left. Screw the police. I told the school what happened, and I got a social services guy to work with me. I moved to my girlfriend's place down the street, and I got my car in my name. At 18, I went to college at Georgia Tech. I put myself through school. I spent 2.5 years as a TA there, and I graduated with a degree in computer science. I immediately got a job as a software engineer upon graduation, and I'm making as much as my dad does, and I'm less than half his age. Screw my parents. My dad actually sold my motorcycle while I was in college. He owes me $2,000 because of that, but I'm not even going to bother bringing it up because I don't feel like putting up with his threats anymore. Maybe it's the way I read it, but there was a point where I was like, oh, it feels like he just remembered the motorcycle thing. Like, this whole thing was like an emotional roller coaster between the Harry Potter treatment, the mother, dying, whether or not she was a bad mother and stuff, obviously emotional time for the writer. Point is, this all sucks and I feel for you. When I was younger and had my first bank account, my mother forced me to put her name on it, and my dad helped me get the account. She said that because I was a minor, she could legally get her name on the account even if I said no, and being young, I believed her. I had about $2,000 in the account saved from my first job and such. I checked my account one day afterwards, and it was at negative $2,000. I was super shocked and infuriated. Another time, after paying off the bank, when I was just turning 18, once I just hit 18, she said she wanted no more to do with me since she was no longer getting child support from my dad and was going to move to Florida. I gave her the rent money for the next month. We paid a month in advance just before she left because she was the one who always mailed it out and it was in her name. The next month after she left, I received a notice of eviction because she didn't pay the rent with the money and instead used it to fund her trip to Florida. Last but not least, right before she died, she took out a credit card in my sister's name and charged up to $15,000. My sister found out after she had passed, and because there was no proof, she was forced to pay off the 15 grand. She cut my sandwich into rectangles instead of triangles. Forgive me, I just wanted a little bit of brevity in this depressing topic. My mother's short list. Spent student loan money I sent from Japan. About $800. Derided me hugely for not driving with my drunk aunt. Chastised me for not wanting to carry her prescription of benzos through China with no script before the night of my wedding. On a trip to her place from out of town, she invited her boyfriend, who had a restraining order against me over the fact that he robbed us for our rent, causing us to get evicted, so I chased him with a bat. She had a restraining order against him too for beating her up. I had to just leave and go back home. She invited my ex to her house and fixed her up with some big black guy while we were freshly broken up at 18 years old. They screwed in my old bedroom. She adopted a guy who me and my friends warned her about. He was later arrested for attempted murder, beat her boyfriend in my apartment because she found out he had hit on my girlfriend, and now refuses to see my child, her only grandchild, because I insisted on her sobriety to see him. I could go on. Mom is kind of a C-word. There must be so much internal conflict for people whose parents are just bad and horrible to them, but it's like they're your parent and they're the only one that you've got, so you want them in your life to some degree, and you want them to be better for themselves and you. Like, God, I can't imagine. This is probably going to pale in comparison to most other people, but I can think of two things my mother did to me that were kind of messed up. The most messed up thing my dad did was leave when I was a baby, but meh, screw that guy. 1. She cut a hole in my bedroom door big enough for the cat to get through so it could get away from the new dog. The cat decided to habitually use my bed as a litter box. I was 13 at the time, so there wasn't much I could do but try to block the hole. She would yell at me for blocking the hole. Meanwhile, my bed is reeking of cat urine. No matter how much I tried to clean it, it just stunk, and eventually so did all the rest of the things in my room. I was not very popular at school that year. Eventually, I got a new bed, but only after much whining on my part. The carpet still smelled like cat pee, so I never wanted to have friends over or anything like that. Fast forward a few years. Considering that my mother seemed to value pets' comfort and security over mine, to the point where it created an unpleasant living environment for me, I decided to move out as soon as I turned 18. Although I had saved up money for my car myself, my mom's name was on the title because I was a minor. The insurance and everything else was also in her name, again because I was a minor. 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, I made arrangements and started getting ready to leave. When she found out I was planning on leaving, she took the tags off of my car and turned them into the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV. The reason that this is messed up is because now I would have to get the car re-tagged. What that entails is getting the car inspected. In this state, before a vehicle can be tagged, you must take it to a mechanic and get it certified as road safe. I had to have a few minor repairs. It was my first car, so it was a used 1993 Ford station wagon. It was bound to need work eventually anyway. But of course, the amount I had to spend was enormous because I took it to a mechanic, and I was an 18-year-old girl with no concept of anything mechanical. It came to about $300 in 2002. That was 2 weeks' paycheck at Arby's, where I had been working since I was 15 to save up enough money to get the hell out and go to college. But I did have my savings, so I dipped into it. After the inspection, I had to pay for the tags. I had to put a huge down payment on a new insurance policy because my mom canceled mine a week before she took my tags off of my car, but she still took my money when I came to her with my monthly payment. So I had to get high-risk insurance for being an uninsured motorist, even though I had no clue I was. I also had to pay taxes on my car. That's right, I had to pay frickin' taxes on a car I already paid my frickin' taxes on when I bought it. If I had been the one to turn in my tags, I would have gotten a refund from the DMV for the tags and taxes and all that. Since my mom was the one to do it, she got $250 for free. All in all, between fees, repairs, and my new awesomely high insurance rates, I spent close to $1,000 just getting my piece of crap car that probably wasn't even worth $1,000 back on the road. Happy birthday to me. I didn't have enough money to move. I had only planned on living in a rented home for the summer before I went away to college, so I hadn't allotted more than $1,500 for it. Now, unless I wanted to dip into the college fund I had set up for myself, I was stuck at home. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.